Hey, this is Dave with Taboo Customs. Today we are working on our M715 project with the goal of getting our LS7 engine, 4L80 transmission located in our chassis, get our new motor mounts tacked in the correct location, and then what we're going to do is we're going to check up on the fit up between the grill and the fenders and the hood and make sure we get that engine located to where we won't have any issues moving forward with the project. We'll talk about what we look at when we do that, and then we'll show you how we're getting it done. All right, so starting with the engine here, if you've been watching, you know we are using a 2005 Corvette LS7 that was pulled from a Corvette and rebuilt by a company down in Missouri. When we got this engine here, it was basically ready to start on a pallet. We tossed a battery in it, some fuel in the bucket they had sent with it, and we're able to start this engine up to make sure that everything was working correctly and running. Since then, we've gone and basically stripped the wiring harness off, stripped some of the aesthetic pieces off, just to make sure we stripped anything off, one we didn't want to damage, or we didn't want to get in the way right now, and we start to try to figure out how we're going to actually go and mount this engine. Now, one of the biggest things obviously with mounting this engine is going to be, where are the motor mounts? Now, this engine came with the stock Corvette motor mounts, which a lot of times when I'm putting engines in, if I can use the stock mounts, I do like to do that. I've done that several times with different LS engines. However, there are a lot of options out there, but some of those options we found we run into more interference if we try to use an aftermarket option, especially if we're doing something in a smaller vehicle like a Wrangler or a Cherokee. So with this, we are going to try to use the original OEM motor mounts, and that also allows us to use the original OEM motor mount bushings. So you can see these are pretty substantial. So this also, gives us some assurance that we know that these motor mounts are going to hold up to the horsepower and the torque that this LS7 does put out. So onto the frame, as you can see, we have pretty much stripped from the firewall forward completely out of this Jeep. The front clip is gone. Now we did leave a couple of pretty important items, and I'll talk about those. One, we did go ahead and we got our steering box mounting, since this is a custom steering box mounting and a power steering box. We did get that done because we have to ensure that, one, our engine does not interfere with our steering, because that's going to be very important moving forward. And we also want to make sure that we left our steering column so that we could check that the steering shaft here from the column to the box does have good clearance. Now, not too worried about it on this Jeep. Like I said, much wider than Wranglers and Cherokees, but I can tell you definitely on Cherokees especially, you often have problems with the exhaust when you're going to a V8 and the steering shaft clearance. So we want to make sure that we do have that in there. Now we've also stripped out the motor mounts and basically everything else, and we've gone ahead and we did have an issue with this frame up here, right here. This cross member to this frame rail was completely broken apart. So we re-squared everything up, re-welded it in, welded in several gussets in here to basically add in additional strength, and we'll probably, before we ship this off to the powder coater, continue to add to that, just to make sure, especially when we do our suspension, that we have enough strength to handle both the engine and the suspension with this. Now, you can also see that we have painted the front of this frame gray. Now, the reason for that is we have a new tool, and that is a 3D scanner. So what we did is we've gone in and we've actually scanned this frame, the front of the frame from the firewall forward. We also scanned the engine and transmission. And then what we did was we also measured where the hood would be and where the firewall would be. And we were able to take all that information, put it into our 3D CAD system, and use all that information to get a jump start on how we wanted to design our motor mounts. And so those are such a critical item, and they're going to be a little bit different. And we'll show you how they're different as we move forward. Taking a little bit deeper dive into this new technology we have that should save us a lot of time in our design work is, you can see that on the right here I've got our scan software, and we've got the LS7 pulled up. Now on the top and for the length, I really just wanted to see the size of the engine with the transmission, but then on the bottom I definitely needed a lot of detail around where the motor mounts were at, where the exhaust was at, where, for instance, the fuel filter might be, so that as we move forward, we're designing different things such as the motor mounts and the suspension, which we're going to do the same work on, is we would be able to ensure that ahead of time when we're designing that we don't hit any of those items. So now with this data, we're able to pull it over into our SolidWorks software here on the left. So in red, and I know it's harder to see because it's a mesh and there's about 1 million lines in there. In red, we've got the LS7. In green, I've got our frame. So we are able to take the LS7, put it into SolidWorks, made it in such a way that we're able to see where the hood clearance would be, where the firewall clearance would be, and approximately get that engine in the correct location, and then design our motor mounts directly on the computer so that we can go out and create those and get them built. So we should be able to pretty cleanly get our motor in place pretty easily once we start out there in the shop, since we have real-time data exactly what it looks like out there. So we better go out and we better get back to it. All right, so the first step that we are going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to weld in our reinforcement plates. Now, right now we just did one single plate on the side that we'll weld our motor mount to, partially because this frame is actually pretty good shape, but also because later on we design our suspension, more likely we're going to add to it. So at that point, we'll make sure we get everything shored up enough that we are comfortable with it. But we'll go ahead, and we do have two different plates because we have one that has to be cut out for our steering box plates that we already added. So we'll basically just be butting this plate up into where we did a bit of a fish mouth here to go around that plate. So let's get to work. With the reinforcement plates in place, we've got our motor mounts that we designed off of our scan data and SolidWorks. You can see they pretty close to what we were looking at there in SolidWorks. In the end, we're going to probably, the rough intent was to be kind of right around in that area. You can see we added some additional slots in here to weld to make sure that we're tying this plate back into the frame, even in the center of it, so there's no bowing of that plate. The next step will be grabbing the engine, and we're going to use the forklift with this and just have to be a little bit more careful with it than we were taking the old engine out. But the forklift will give us quite a bit of flexibility for moving the engine around. so it's a little tedious doing it, especially by yourself, but slow and steady gets it done pretty smoothly. We ended up getting a pretty good spot. A lot of things to consider, obviously, putting this in. You know, one, the distance back. The radiator essentially sits right here across those two holes, so we have a good 5-6 inches of clearance behind the radiator to the engine for our electric fans. But with this Jeep truck, we actually have a massive amount of space in front of the radiator. So if it were an issue, we could put a fan in front of the radiator, but it would be best to pull the air through instead of push it. But push comes to shove, well, yeah, we could push it. So did want to make sure, you know, left a fair amount of clearance back here for, you know, whatever we decide to do with the firewall and all of the rest of the modifications we're going to make. If you watched the video closely, you saw me check. I checked that we have pretty good clearance from our steering box up to the steering column, so we shouldn't have an issue with running into our mounts down here or the exhaust manifolds. I did also check the exhaust manifold clearance. The exhaust manifold downpipe clears, you know, our motor mounts. However, it does not clear the transmission. Since we're using a 4L80, as it goes down, it cuts over, and they both ran down the middle. We will end up just cutting these downpipes off here and probably running our exhaust roughly straight back until we can figure out where we need to go. Beyond that, another thing I was watching while I was putting it in, making sure with this AC compressor we get these lines above the frame so that we could easily bring them out and go where we need to with those lines. You know, a lot of things, we did a lot of checking and measuring. I tried to find a point up here at the front to measure back on both sides to see how even it was, of course, seeing how even each side was vertically, and then going under and checking the output for the transmission, making sure that it was centered. At first, actually wasn't centered, it was about a ½ inch off. Got that centered up, which then actually brought both of these measurements on each side into being, you know, really close to exactly the same. So felt pretty good about that. Got everything tacked up, held in place. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to put the front clip back on it just to look at our clearances, make sure we don't have any major issues, then pretty much say that we have it placed where we want it. Now, once we get everything back out, we'll go ahead, we'll probably tack up our mounts a little bit better. You can see I do have a gusset I need to add down in here to help strengthen up that mount, but once we do that, should be good to go. So with the front clip in place, we can now see how much clearance we have between the radiator and the engine. It's really good clearance up front there. Like I've mentioned a couple times, a lot more clearance than I'm used to having, so happy with that. In general, it looks great in there. Height is good. We're several inches below the top of the radiator, so we should clear hood and all of the everything on the hood with no problem. So everything looks pretty good. You kind of see our front clip is in pretty poor shape with rust and damage, which is why we use the forklift to put it on. But anyway, so far so good. We're happy with it, and we'll keep moving along with our project. Thank you for watching. You can contact us at taboocustoms.com, or you can leave a message here on this video if you have any questions or comments.